Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kimberly James. I work with Sanity Solutions, and I'm going to go ahead. We're going to get started with this. We're going to be pretty much on the dot and get underway. I'm going to hand this over to Yangzhi Zhao from Nutanix, and he's going to take you guys through all this info and demo for the day. So here we go.
Perfect. Thanks, Kimberly. All right. So thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Yangzhi Zhao, like Kimberly mentioned, and I am the Nutanix American Sales Director for Nutanix Frame, and which is our VDI and Desktop as a Service solution. Just some quick background on me. I started off my career at Citrix. I was with Citrix Consulting Services for about a decade, and then from there, moved on to a EUC reseller, doing mostly Citrix and Horizon deployments, and then sorry, you guys for folks, you guys go on the screen. Perfect, thank you, Kimberly. So today we'll be talking about Nutanix Frame, and I've been with Nutanix about a year now, and happy to be talking about Frame and kind of providing an overview, and then as well as a demo of the overall environment. And with me today, we also have Nick Goodman from Sanity Solutions. He's one of their solutions architects, and he'll be co-presenting with me in terms of the Frame overview and providing you guys understanding of the key features of Frame, how we handle things like security, how we integrate with both public cloud and private cloud in terms of deploying Frame on-prem on your Nutanix AHV clusters. And then I'll be going through a short couple slides around architecture in terms of how it looks from an overall architectural platform perspective, both on-prem and public cloud. And then we'll show you kind of a demo of what it looks like from both end user perspective, as well as for admins to manage the environment, ongoing. So with that, let's kind of dive right on in. So I always like to start off with just a history of Frame, right? And the reason why is because in the overall kind of end user computing type of industry, Frame's relatively new. So we were founded back in the early 2010s. Founded by Nikola Bazinovich. Nikola now runs all of desktop services here in Nutanix, so everything from Citrix and Horizon and running on Nutanix AOS to Frame, right? All rolls up under Nikola. And really, it's important to understand why Frame was founded in the first place. What are the pain points? What are the goals? Use cases that we were looking to address with a brand new solution. So the first goal is really to make VDI very simple, right? Simple to consume for both the end user, simple to manage for the administrators, and also make it cloud native, right? So simplicity, time to deployment, ROI, right? Those were really the first primary goal for Frame. And the second goal was really to, at the time, address use cases that traditional VDI tended to shy away from for a long time. And that was really around delivering 3D and high graphics applications with a great user experience, right? Over remoting protocols. So things like, delivering AutoCAD and, Photoshop and Revit, right? And Maya, and delivering those through a virtual desktop or virtual application type of experience to end users. So what was developed was our own remoting protocol. It's proprietary to Nutanix. It's called the Frame Remoting Protocol, or FRP. And we're actually the first VDI solution on the market to standardize on H.264. So if you guys are familiar with other solutions in the market, you'll know that over time H.264 has become the overall standard across the industry. But we can happily say that we were the first to standardize that back in 2012. And on top of the H.264 streaming codec, we've also added a lot of advanced features, including really intelligent and really adaptive quality of service. And I'll show you that in the demo. Basically, Frame will automatically be able to adjust itself based on any kind of changes to your end users, bandwidth or latency, and really take what it has to provide the best possible user experience. And so how we approach the market and how we develop the protocol really lent itself to a lot of our first customers being software vendors in this space. So Adobe, Autodesk, and SolidWorks are actually our first three customers, 1, 2, and 3 in that order. And they all use Frame early on for very similar purposes. It was really to do things like, beta testing and, end user training and certification, virtual learning type of, use cases where the end users may not have a very powerful, workstation with a GPU to run their, software natively, right? So instead they can use Frame, deliver it and host it in the public cloud and deliver it through just a browser, right? And they're still our customers today. But over the years, we've kind of worked very closely, obviously, with our initial software vendor partners, as well as more and more enterprise customers over the past 8 years to add just more features and functionality to the product to where we are today, where we are enterprise desktop as a service solution. And we were acquired by Nutanix in 2018. All right, with that, I will go ahead and hand things over to Nick to kind of give you guys an overview of the Frame features and how we handle things like security. But Nick, take it away.
Thank you. Again, like you said, my name is Nick Goodman. I'm a solutions architect here at Sanity. I've been with Sanity about 3.5 years now, and background is similar. I've been IT industry for about 20 years in various aspects, from end user computing to infrastructure to kind of all paths basically. So we wanted to talk today about Frame. So basically, what is Frame? Frame is a secure platform. We deliver Windows applications and desktops to users, Windows and Linux applications and desktops to users, any device, any browser, right? So whether you're a Windows laptop, desktop, Mac, Linux, we can deliver everything to you securely through HTML5 browser. And Frame is a true multi-cloud desktop as a service. The Frame infrastructure runs in the cloud and allows you to target your on-prem Nutanix clusters running AHV to spin up your VDI workloads, or it also allows you to target the 3 major cloud providers, AWS, Azure, or GCP. All of the security is handled from the Frame infrastructure to the individual cloud providers, ID management, brokering, all the integration and policies are all handled from that single control plane up in the Frame cloud. Features and functionality of Frame, like Yangzhi had mentioned, pioneered the video streaming process to the browsers. The QoS is built on H.264, not based on RDP. It really is a totally different solution than what Citrix and RDP and then the other and Horizon are using there. All of the full functionalities and features you would expect from a VDI solution are there. Being able to copy and paste, from your clipboard, from your local machine to your VDI instance. A really unique printing support. I know for folks that have used VDI in the past, printing has always been a big thorn in the side on whether you do printer redirecting or use a universal print driver or whatnot. They have a unique feature on how it's basically printing to PDF, and using your local browser, it's sending that print job back to your local printer. So the users that print see that same printer that they're used to seeing, and not trying to figure out which redirection or which printer or which driver am I supposed to be using to make sure that my prints work successfully. They have the ability to drag and drop your files from your Frame desktop back to your local desktop, and of course all of these are can be set and used based upon the admin. You can turn off or allow these features on a per user basis as well. Multi-monitor support is available up to 4 displays, and you also have the ability to spin up GPU instances as well. So if you have a standard user, they may be just using a standard virtual machine, but you do have the ability to enable GPU usage for if they're AutoCAD or Photoshop or things that might need those higher end graphic usage. USB support is available for, of course, your mice, keyboards, and other devices, whether it's a storage device, USB keys, or things that might be necessary to accomplish your job there. Session roaming. So if you connect to a session via your iPad and maybe you disconnect and reconnect via your Windows desktop, your session will stay active if you need it to, whether it's a persistent or non-persistent image that can be set up on a per user or per device basis there. For those familiar or not familiar, there's the ability to do both non-persistent and persistent images. With a non-persistent desktop, when a user connects to a desktop, it's going to spin up a fresh image from a gold or from a base image, and you can go in there and they can customize and do what they do, and when they're finished, they can log off and it'll basically reset that desktop. Whereas a persistent image will, you go in there and you have similar to your desktop, you have your office or your home, whenever changes you make, whatever you do, all of that stuff will stay persistent and be basically your desktop going forward until it would be reset at some point or it could be changed. An enterprise user profile, so you have the ability to set up so that if you're using a non-persistent desktop, you can make sure that there's a profile disk that's attached to that virtual machine. So if the user does make customizations on a non-persistent image, you can, whether it's bookmarks or shortcuts or things of that nature, you can make sure that those settings are saved even on a non-persistent image there. And of course, you have the ability to join your instances to Active Directory domain, or you can do non-domain instances depending on the needs. You may have domain join instances for all your internal employees, and there's cases where you could have a non-domain join instance for, say, contractors or outside people that are working for the company that may not need access to internal resources but still need to work on a company machine, if you will.
Perfect. And I would just say real quick from a GPU perspective is that what we, in the public cloud, we support, obviously Azure, AWS, and GCP, and we do support GPU-enabled instances, mostly NVIDIA, cards across the various providers. We'll eventually be also supporting some of the new AMD GPUs that are coming out in Azure, so be aware of that. And then on-prem, we support vGPUs, right? So Nutanix AHV, we support a number of Tesla cards from NVIDIA. And you can basically assign, hey, 1 gig GPU profile, 8 gig GPU profile, whatever it may be, to specific user sessions. Great job, Nick.
Excellent.
All right, next slide.
Go back.
Oh, there's a slide. Oh,
yeah.
sorry, yeah, security. There you go.
Yeah. So this just real quick, I want to touch on security, and I think this is important with with securing our data and making sure that it's as tight as can be here. And there's no client, there's no plugins required. It's HTML5 based, so it's just a browser based session. Makes it much easier to support your end users in a work from home or work from anywhere type of initiative, especially right now with what we're all dealing with. So much easier to roll out. Role-based access control, again, you can, based upon individual users or depending which cloud they're running in, you can support different functionality, whether you disable or enable control panel, or clipboard, and whatever whether it's an AD joined computer, each group can have different access depending on the roles that's needed for it. And the integration with all the different, basically anything that supports SAML 2.0 will work. So whether it's an Active Directory domain, ADFS, Google Authenticator, Okta, etc., all of those SAML 2.0 and OAuth applications are supported, as well as two-factor and multi-factor authentication. I think important, again, is the admin control of your different features, upload, download, being able to drag and drop and copy. That is a feature that can be turned on or off on a per user basis. And encryption, of course, right from the stream is encrypted, and all the data at rest is encrypted as well. So that's really important these days. All of the enterprise grade compliances are there: SOC 2, ISO 27001, the GovCloud. There's ITAR compliance, and they are now complete with the audit for FedRAMP moderate.
Yeah, we're actually fully authorized now for FedRAMP moderate. So we achieved that about a month ago, which is great. So for those in public sector, dealing with U.S. government customers, we actually use quite a bit in the overall, public sector space. So very happy for that.
Yeah, that's great. And then also there's secure government cloud option with Azure Gov and AWS GovCloud, and of course it is a separate ops and support team to run that.
Perfect.
And last, really the customer choice right here, right? You pick your infrastructure, and it can be one or multiple infrastructures. You could start with targeting your on-prem AHV Nutanix environment and deploy your virtual infrastructure there. And then maybe you have a need for contractors or a different group, and then you can deploy another target towards AWS or Azure or GCP, right? So it's not a one or nothing. You can have multiple multiple groups or multiple people in different types of instances, depending on what the needs are there. And at that point, you decide how you're going to authorize the users. It could be simply an Active Directory domain joined machine. You can use MFA and have Okta and AD, or all of these different options are available from an authorization perspective there. And when you bring your apps or your image, if you're targeting your on-premise AHV deployment, then you can bring your own Windows image and customize your gold image from there. If you're using one of the cloud-based solutions, you do basically start with a cloud image, and then from there customize your gold or base image to your needs. And then once you've got your image created, at that point you'll connect your files and your data. It could be a VPN back to your home office for a network file access. It could be a Windows file server in the cloud where you have another VLAN or VPC that's running a Windows file server or whatever that may be, or you can connect it to a OneDrive or Box or the different providers out there. And there's a direct integration with these providers to allow you to access those files. Or you can also install the OneDrive or whatever you can install the native application to access the files as well. And then once you do that, it's as simple as delivering this product to the users.
Perfect.
And here's the supported OS infrastructure currently. Windows 10 is supported on AHV and Azure. And Windows 2012 through 2019 is supported on AWS there. And keep in mind, if you are doing on-prem, you do need to support bring your own license. So that's kind of a given, I suppose, but make sure we note that. And for Azure, you do bring your own license for Windows as well. And some of the other instances have options for OSs included as a pay-as-you-go, right? With AWS and Azure, you can provide those licenses are provided as part of the hourly cost of your server OSs.
Yeah, and just note here that the reason why we don't support Windows 10 natively in either AWS or GCP is really a Microsoft, a EULA issue. Is that in order to deploy Windows 10 in a non-Azure public cloud, is that they require customers to basically purchase dedicated hosts or dedicated instances in order to do so, right? So it becomes very cost prohibitive. You're not able to take advantage of non-dedicated hosts or pay-as-you-go type of usage. But yeah, in general. If you're using Windows 10, you'll need to have either an E3 or E5 or Microsoft 365 type of agreement in place with Microsoft. Or if you don't have that, you can pay for Windows VDA or virtual desktop access entitlements for your users. So that's kind of an option there. And then for deploying on a server-based OS like a 2012 R2 or 2016 or 2019, just like with Citrix or Horizon on-prem, you'll need to have server CALs and RDS CALs. In the public cloud using a server-based OS, Microsoft requires you to have a RDS SAL. So that's a subscriber access license that you would use, and that's also on a per name basis. All right, I think one more slide and then we'll go into the architecture, right?
Yeah, so Y-Frame, simple, right? It's cloud native, it's ready to go, multi-tenant native. I think this is really important, being able to, whether you're targeting on-prem or targeting cloud-based solutions, it's also gives you the ability to have multiple tenants along with that. So whether it's just your employees or it's contractors or different departments or different divisions, it's easy to separate those out. The web scale goes back to the Nutanix design, right? It's incredibly easy to scale this out, whether it's on-prem with AHV or out to the cloud, right? It's simple to add instances as it goes. And finally, secure by design, right? Like we talked about all the different security features and certifications that it has, encryption and all that. And multi-cloud support, again, it's just no cloud lock-in. You can start with AWS, you can move to Azure, you can have it on-prem. There's nothing that's really preventing you from having that flexibility there. And deploying globally on AWS, Azure, GCP, this is going to be a highly available solution that can be deployed on multiple availability zones to give you that security and that availability. Centralized management, again, the frame control plane is a single point to manage all of your instances, whether it is on-prem or whether it is a cloud-based solution. And finally, I mean, the administration side of this, of course, Nutanix does support Citrix and Horizon View on-prem, but if you look at the care and feeding of an on-prem VDI solution compared to what Frame offers, it's a very simple and easy to deploy solution.
Yeah. Perfect. All right, I think I will now cover some of the architecture. Yeah, so thanks, Nick. That was fantastic. So in terms of the architecture, here is a high-level overview of what Frame is. What you'll want to kind of consider yourself with. In the middle, this is the Frame Cloud backplane. This is, again, what's hosted in AWS for our customers as a service. So this is handling everything from identity management of the environment when a user logs in, but based on whatever IDP they use, Frame will know, hey, these are the resources you have access to. These are the policy permissions and configuration settings, for their type of for their session. We're also handling orchestration with either your public cloud, tenants and subscriptions, or your private cloud AHV clusters, right? So both options are available. We're also handling all workload management. So basically all provisioning, deprovisioning, termination of VMs. That's all handled, by Frame's backplane. So there's no need for you to use your public cloud, consoles or your on-prem Prism Central to handle that. That's all being handled automatically by Frame. Same thing with basically powering on VMs and rebooting VMs as needed, right? And then in terms of brokering, the key thing to note here is that once Frame brokers a user into the VM that's be hosting their session, it's a direct connection at that point between the end user device and that VM. So some of the other desktop as a service solution players like Windows WVD, right? They're brokering and their gateways only available in certain data centers. So what they do is they basically hairpin your protocol into that specific data center. In the US, it'll be US East 2, right? With Frame, that's not an issue whatsoever. It's a direct connection, right, between that endpoint device and that VM. On that note is if you're familiar with the end user computing space in general, just know that we're a lot more similar to Zen Desktop and Horizon View than we are with Zen App or Horizon RDSH, right? So it's basically one VM per user session that gets spun up. We don't have the capability of doing multiple sessions per VM like a Zen App or like a RDSH session. So just keep in mind, it's always one VM per user session. On the left here is your public cloud providers. And the key thing to note here is that we are leveraging the native API gateways of these public clouds, right? Some other solutions will have a more extensible architecture where you're dropping in things like a Cloud Connector VM to broker that communication. With Frame, it's very different. Like, for example, in Azure, we're an application registration that you would configure for Frame, GCP or a project ID that you automatically link together. So it's a much more native and tight integration with the public clouds. So what this means is that from a single integration, you can deploy to any of these public cloud data centers globally, right, with a single configuration within Frame, right? And then on the right-hand side is your private cloud. So this is your on-prem AHV cluster or clusters. So we have a couple of, a few different appliances that get deployed here. These are all Linux virtual appliances running on CentOS. Very lightweight, 2 vCPU, 4 gigs of RAM, about 100 megs of disk as required. There's built-in HA for these components as well. And this is basically broken the communication between our Frame control plane and your AHV cluster, right? The CCA basically brokers any kind of information to Prism Central. Moving forward, we'll be eliminating the need for Prism Central. It'll just be Prism Element is all that's required with the next release of the CCA. We also have a workload CCA that's, again, sending power state information to the Frame control plane. So Frame knows, hey, this VM is powered on, this VM is powered off, this user's currently in this VM, right? And then lastly, we have a streaming gateway appliance. So this is very similar to Citrix Nesca gateway, except it's just the reverse proxy or Horizon Security Server or UAG, right? But it's only acting as that proxy. So this is not a true ADC, but the good news is that it's free, right? There's no additional cost for this, and this is basically serving as that reverse proxy for any kind of users that are coming in over the internet. But you can also have external users, coming in through a VPN client if desired. So both options are available, and you can deploy this either on-prem or in your public clouds. So this will be the only component in the environment that would require a public IP and a certificate. All right, so the last slide before we jump into the demo. So this is the hierarchy of Frame, 3-tier hierarchy, and really designed to be very modular and very extensible. Also designed with large enterprises in mind, where there's multiple departments and business units, or if you're a service provider, right, to be able to easily develop a multi-tenant environment to host Frame for your end customers. So the very top level is your customer entity. So at this level, this is where you can set any kind of global settings, a single IDP provider that you want everybody to use if you want to, right? It's also where you would choose your subscription model with Frame. So we have two models in terms of subscription. One is a named user, and one is a concurrent instance, okay? And that's concurrent instance, not concurrent user. So it's that's very important to delineate that. But a concurrent instance subscription is by default twice as expensive as a named user. So it really just depends on what your overall user population is and what your peak usage would be. So if you have, let's say, 1,000 total users, and more than 500 of those users are using Frame day in, day out, it would make sense to get 1,000 named user subscriptions. If, however, you have 1,000 users, but your peak usage is less than 500, let's say 200, right? Instead of buying 1,000 named, you can buy 200 concurrent instances. It is instances, not users on the concurrency side. So it only really applies if you're doing non-persistent desktops, because if you're doing persistent desktops, if you have 1,000 users, then each user would have their own instance dedicated to them. So you have 1,000 instances, so it wouldn't make sense to go with a concurrent instance model in that situation. So really, concurrent instance only applicable if you're doing non-persistent type of workloads. And for those of you maybe wondering, can you have both? Yes, you can have both. You can basically have two separate customer entities. And the great thing about Frame is that's a single pane of glass from a control plane perspective. So you can manage multiple customer entities from a single control plane. So you can basically say, hey, customer entity 1 is using named user. Customer entity 2 is using a concurrent instance. But that is doable. Within customers are organizations. You have to have at least one org per customer entity. But the reason why you would want to create additional orgs, and there's no additional cost for creating as many as you want, but at the org level, you can do a few key things. You can assign different administrators at the org level. You can assign different identity providers here, different policies at this level, and then you can also assign different AHV clusters or public cloud tenants at this level. So for service providers, this is really great because you can basically create a dedicated org per customer, and it's fully separated and delineated from everybody else. You can also do things like granular chargeback. So for instance, if you have a Azure subscription that's for a specific, let's say subsidiary, right? And you want to make sure that all usage charges for that subsidiary go to that specific, Azure subscription. You can link that subscription just to a specific org, and then link another one to another organization, right? So a lot of granularity that can be done at this level. And then lastly, at the very bottom are the actual Frame accounts themselves. You can think of these as like production pools or machine catalogs if you're familiar with, like Citrix, right? But basically, every workload VM, in the overall environment will belong to a unique account within Frame, which belongs to a unique organization, okay? An account is also tied to a specific gold image, what we call sandbox in Frame, and it's also tied to a specific backend architecture. So to kind of give you an example here, let's say you have a Windows 10 virtual desktop image that is for your marketing users, and that's hosted, let's say, in Azure, West 2 in Seattle. That's one account in Frame. If you have that exact same Windows 10 image for your marketing users and you want to deploy that to, let's say, Azure in London, right? That would be a different account within Frame. We do allow you to clone your gold image, your sandbox, from one account to the other, as long as it shares the same backend architecture. So you can clone from Azure to Azure, you can clone from AHV to AHV, but you can't clone from AHV to GCP or from AWS to Azure, right? It has to share the same backend. And then lastly, we do have role-based access control at all levels. So, it flows from the top down. So if you're a customer admin, at this level, you're by default an admin of every single org and an admin of every single account. If you're an org admin of just, let's say, marketing, you would be an account admin of every single account deployed within the marketing organization. And finally, you can basically specify admins for just specific accounts as well. So all options are available. All right, so before we dive into the demo here, any questions from the folks on the phone? And if you're muted, make sure you unmute yourself, or you can also put your questions in the chat window.
Got a question. What type of clients do you guys right now support for the endpoints?
Yeah, great question.
Like Wise terminals or?
Yep, that's a great question. So right now we support any kind of devices or thin clients that have a local browser, right? So as long as it has an HTML5 browser, it'll work. So on the client side, we support any kind of Windows embedded, Windows 10 IoT thin clients. We support, iGel, like Tenzig, Stratodesk, because they all have that local browser. Specifically for like Wise thin clients, because they're PC over IP specific thin clients, we don't use PC over IP with Frame, right? We have our own proprietary protocol that we use. So we are working with a number of thin client providers to basically port our Frame app, which is currently available for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux today, to those specific thin client vendors. So we're working with HP, we're working with Lenovo, working with iGel. So eventually we'll have native Frame app clients for those devices. But as it sits today, it has to have a local web browser in order to work with Frame. All right, let me take a look. I think there was a question in the chat window. I don't see the chat window. Nick, maybe you can.
Yeah, the other question was, what about app-only deployment?
Yes, so we do support both apps, app virtualization, or full virtual desktop. So you have the option of doing both. Just know that even with apps, right, it's still one VM per session, right? So if the user's only accessing one application, it's still going to spin up that full VM for that user session. So just be aware of that from a scalability perspective, in terms of your overall deployment. Any other questions on this piece? Okay, perfect. We'll go into a demo. So this is a Frame desktop, right, that we've been using for this demo. I'm not sure if you noticed, but if I were to exit my PowerPoint, you'll see that this is what Frame looks like, right? This is a desktop that's in a browser. This is running my MacBook. Or if I were to go ahead and disconnect from my session, you'll see that this is what Frame kind of looks like. Oh, there's my chat window. And this is basically, when I disconnected, this just takes us into what's called Launchpad of Frame. And this is really what your users will see when they first log in, whether it's just a desktop icon, if they're getting a full virtual desktop, or they may say something like this, to Steve. I'm sorry, to the gentleman that asked about the app deployment. You can also provide them just access to specific applications, right? Let me kind of go back to my desktop session. I'll go ahead and hit resume. And you'll see that this is kind of what Frame looks like. Frame will automatically resize itself based on the size of your browser window. You can also fix the resolution if you have specific applications that require a specific resolution set. But how you're in Frame? Well, we have this Frame terminal toolbar at the very bottom, right? And this toolbar is designed to provide a lot of really good session state and performance metrics for your end users so they understand what's going on with their connectivity. And also provides a lot of features and functionality for your end users if they're enabled by the admin. So when Nick talked about those features like copy and paste and the ability to upload and download, all those kind of features, those can be enabled or disabled granularly by the administrator, okay? So within Frame, if I kind of go from the left to the right from a toolbar perspective, you'll see the first thing we'll show your users is what their bandwidth usage is, right? So this is a bandwidth health indicator that Frame has built in. That'll basically tell your tell your users, just like kind of their cell phone, right? If they have 1 bar of service or if they have 5 bars of service, right? So you'll see here, right now I have 4 bars of service on my bandwidth health. And this basically, we have this document in terms of, what exact bandwidth is available for each bar, right? We'll also show them what the real-time round-trip latency is with Frame. So right now you'll see that I'm getting about 40 milliseconds of round-trip latency. I'm based in Denver, working in my home office. This particular desktop is running in Google Cloud in California, which is near the Los Angeles area. So it's about 835 miles away between Denver and LA. We'll also show them how long they've been in a session. So right now I've been using the session for about over 2 hours, and I have a max session set for me by policy of 8 hours. And again, this can be completely configurable by the administrator. A max session timeout, not really important for on-prem deployments because you're just paying for additional power and cooling. But certainly if you're deploying into the public cloud, every hour of use, right, they are getting, you're being billed for that utilization within the public cloud.
We have another question in the chat here too, asking about USB devices and regards to any delays, USB-based microphones.
Yeah, so we support audio conferencing with Frame. We do not support video conferencing today. We don't support webcams as of now. And right now, honestly, if you were to do like video conferencing through a VDI session, unless it's being redirected to local device, which is what some vendors do, you'll get a really poor performance in general with video conferencing. But audio conferencing works really well through Frame in terms of how we handle it. I've done personally calls where I've launched a Frame session, hosted out of California. This is back when I was living in Chicago. And then I was calling my teammate who's also right next to me in Chicago. And he was running his Frame session out of a AWS data center in Frankfurt, Germany. So the call, we did a call through Zoom as well as through Slack and through Teams. It basically went from Chicago to California, California to Frankfurt, Frankfurt back to Chicago. And it was a really crisp call. There was about, probably a quarter-second delay from when I was speaking to when, my teammate heard it. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to what your overall bandwidth availability is to handle the call in the first place, as well as what your overall latency is. But for that particular session, we were peaking about 220 milliseconds of round-trip latency overall. A great question.
I guess, my question is around, so we're a radiology group, right? So we have these guys that dictate from home. So they use a USB-based microphone that they click on and click off as they talk. And we've seen with stuff in the past, like the VMware solution, where there was just so much latency that it was just unusable. So I'm just curious. Yeah.
You're talking about Dragon?
Kind of went into some of the auto. Yeah, similar to Dragon.
Similar to Dragon. Okay, yeah. I personally haven't played with it, but I know that our engineering team has done a lot of enhancements overall to audio performance and microphone performance in general. So I can't speak to it because I haven't seen it. But it's one of those things where you can certainly test it and make sure that from a delay perspective, there's not a major issue. But at the end of the day, it does come down to how far your user is from their their actual Frame session, right? But I would imagine it would handle it, pretty well, just because of how we handle our audio traffic through H.264. Okay. I know that was kind of like a non-answer answer because I really haven't seen it, so I don't want to say something that is inaccurate. All right. Other things we'll kind of show your users is what the real-time bandwidth usage of their session is. So you'll see here that we are only consuming a kilobit per second, right? And the reason why is that because, built into our Frame protocol, we built in a number of features, and one of them is a heartbeat mode. So anytime, Frame detects that there's nothing happening on the server side, right, Frame will automatically go into a heartbeat mode and only consume a kilobit. You'll see a spike there for a second because, change from 1038 to 1039, right? And as soon as you start moving around the mouse and start doing things in Frame, Frame will automatically consume bandwidth as needed, right? As soon as it realizes nothing's happening, it immediately goes back to that 1 kilobit per second heartbeat mode. But this really kind of gets into what Frame is all about, and it's really the performance of our protocol. So if I were to click on here, we'll actually provide you even more metrics in terms of your current resolution, your current frame rates that you're getting for the session. Obviously, nothing's changing, so you'll see that frame rate is 0. But let's kind of show you what Frame can do. And what Frame does best is how it adapts to different connectivities. So if I were to click on my gear icon and go to settings, you'll see that right now I have it set by policy that I can consume up to 16 megs per second for any kind of video traffic and 128 kilobits for audio, okay? So if it's available to me on my local ISP, those are my max session caps, okay? So let's leave that alone. Let's go ahead and play, let's say, a YouTube video for you guys and show you what Frame can do. And obviously keep a track of the frame rates, which is important because we're doing this through, video conferencing. So there might be some delay between, where you guys are and where I am. And then take a look at, the bandwidth utilization for the session, right? So this is a 1080p video that I'm running in YouTube, okay? You'll see here that's 1080p. And it looks like I'm getting about 30 frames per second, bursting up to 40 frames per second for this YouTube video, okay? And then from bandwidth perspective, it's chewing through, it looks like around anywhere from 3 to 5 megs per second on average, right, for this particular video, okay? But what happens if I don't have 5 megs of throughput? Well, this is what Frame does best. I can simulate that. I can go to my gear icon, go to settings, and say, you know what, instead of 16 megs, maybe I'm going down my coffee shop and I only have less than a meg. I can basically throttle that down to, let's say, 800K or 600K even, and hit apply, right? And you'll see Frame will automatically start throttling down the bandwidth utilization, so it's under a meg, right? And automatically start adapting the performance of the session accordingly. So what you'll notice is that frame rates is still getting about 30 frames per second, and the resolution of the video, you'll notice, has degraded slightly, but not as significant as you would expect, right? And this is because Frame is also intelligent enough to be aware of what kind of content you're viewing through your session. So anytime you're watching any kind of multimedia content, Frame's going to automatically prioritize everything in this window over everything else around it, right? So it's able to take advantage of the bandwidth that you do have to, again, provide the best possible end user experience. And you can also tell Frame things like this, where, you know what, I want to save on bandwidth, but I want to sacrifice resolution. I can go black and white, right? And Frame will automatically go into grayscale mode, and you'll see that bandwidth utilization becomes reduced by almost up to 50%. And as soon as you go from an area of poor connection to a better connection, Frame will automatically adapt itself. So again, I can simulate this by saying, hey, I'll increase my bandwidth. And over time, Frame will automatically recognize that, say, hey, I have better and better bandwidth, and start improving the overall experience more and more. You'll see that we're already at 1.3 megs. It'll start increasing more and more to provide the best possible experience with the connectivity that you do have. Okay, so that's that piece. And let me kind of go in and kind of show you some other stuff. So Nick talked about a lot of the features. We talked about the ability to handle local printing and handle local client drive mapping, stuff like that. Those are things that are very common in VDI. We just do things very differently with Frame. And the reason why we do so is for a number of reasons. But again, we designed it really for the modern workspace. So we know that in a lot of situations these days, especially if you're supporting BYO device or personal devices, right, is that users will be using a combination of local applications, web applications, as well as VDI delivered desktops or applications. So we want to make it very easy to move in and out. So for example, if you want to get a file from your local machine into Frame, right, we don't do any kind of local client drive mapping where we're mapping your, let's say, your C drive or your Mac OS hard drive into your VDI session within Frame as another drive, right? It's not here. The C drive is actually the C drive of my Frame desktop. But let's say I want to get a file from my local machine into Frame. Well, you'll see that we have this special Uploads folder and Downloads Now folder, right? That's unique to Frame. And if I wanted to, let's say, get a file into Frame from my local machine, whether it's on my desktop or wherever, I simply take it, drag it over to the terminal window anywhere, let it go, and Frame will automatically upload that file into the Uploads folder. From here, you can save it to your home drive or your Windows file servers, your SharePoint environment, wherever it may be, right? We also have native integrations built in for things like Google Drive and OneDrive, Box, and Google Drive, Dropbox. You'll see that I have all 4 enabled, but 2 connected, right? And you'll see that my Google Drive basically shows up as a G drive, and then my personal Dropbox as an R drive, okay? You can always install the native clients from those providers. You'll see that my OneDrive account installed here. I can also install Google Drive file stream as well. Really just depends on how you want to bring that connectivity to your users. But if I want to, let's say, connect my Box account, I simply click on Box, hit connect, and Frame will prompt me to enter my credentials. This will be stored as an OAuth token on our backplane, so the next time your user logs in, they don't have to re-enter the credentials every time. All right, so if I go back to my Uploads folder, and let's say I want to download this file back down to my endpoint device. Well, I simply just drag and drop that to my Downloads Now folder, put it in there, and Frame will automatically prompt me to save it somewhere locally on my MacBook, right? So if I save it to my Downloads folder, hit save, and Frame will simply, download that back down. If I were to open my Downloads folder, right, you'll see, here, you'll see that's right there, right? Downloaded at 10:44 a.m. All right, other things that we do specifically, for things like, again, designed with BYO and work from home in mind, is how we handle local printing, right? You can always, map your print servers, your network printers within Frame, just like any other kind of VDI session, right, and print to that. But when you're handling local USB printing, one of the biggest challenges, especially when you're talking about work from home, is that you have, end users that are using a wide, array of different printer vendors and models. So with traditional VDI, how you would handle it is really 3 ways, right? Option 1 is you would use the UPD, right, or universal print driver that would come with the solution, and you hope that that UPD works with whatever printers your user are using. If the UPD doesn't work for whatever reason, your second option would be to install the native driver for that printer directly onto your gold image, right? And then option 3 would be to go with a third party, something like a Tricera or Uniprint or ThinPrint, and use their print solution to support it. With Frame, we are out of the business of print drivers. Instead, what we did was we really, again, designed it with a lot of thought. So for example, if I want to print this document in my PowerPoint, I'll simply go to File, and I'll go to Print. And you'll see that Frame will automatically direct me to print to the Frame printer, okay? It's the only printer on there outside of the default XPS doc writer and OneNote, okay? And if I were to print just this slide, hit Current, right? When I hit Print, what's actually happening is Frame is automatically converting this document into a PDF. It automatically streams that PDF down to my local MacBook, where it'll be held in system memory. And it'll actually prompt my MacBook to present to me whatever local print configurations I have on my MacBook. If I were to show you my local print configuration, I drag this over, you'll see that on my MacBook, all I have is this HP MB5000 series printer at home, okay? It's the only one I have available on my, my MacBook. If I hit Print, again, automatically converting this into a PDF, streaming it down, and it's gonna prompt me right here, right, to select my local printer. And this window is not from Frame. This is actually from my MacBook, and you'll see that the HP MB is right there. So what are the pros and cons of this? Well, the pros are, for you as an admin, for any kind of local USB type of print scenarios, you don't have to worry about installing print drivers, into your gold image, right? Is that, automatically work out of the box. The challenge of this would be is that if you're handling any kind of documents that cannot be properly rendered into a PDF, right? And that can become garbled, that would be a challenge for Frame today, right? As long as the document can be converted into PDF and rendered properly, then it'll work just fine. All right, so let me go ahead and close everything, and let me go ahead and show you let me show you one other thing real quick, multi-monitor support. So I mentioned that we support up to 4 monitors today, so I can't show you 2 separate physical monitors, but what I can do is this. I can go to Manage Displays and just simply add a second monitor, right? This is another browser window in this case. You'll see I can just hit Start Streaming, and Frame will automatically now have 2 separate monitors from the single VM, right? And Frame knows that, hey, this is the right monitor, right? This is the left monitor. And if I wanted to, let's say, move something across, Frame can do that, right? You minimize this, you'll see that, this is how we handle multi-monitors. So wanted to show you that piece real quick. All right, in the interest of time, really want to kind of go in and show you the control plane really quick of Frame. So again, I'll go ahead and exit my session. I'll go ahead and disconnect. And again, this is Launchpad. If you are an admin, when you click on your username in the upper right, you'll see a button called Go to Dashboard. If you're not an admin, you won't see this, but I am an admin. So if I go to Dashboard, you'll see that this takes me into the control plane of Frame. And as an admin, any other accounts I'm an admin of would all be available here. So if I wanted to manage another account, I can do so. I can say, hey, I want to manage my non-prod environment. I can click on that, and it'll automatically take me into a different dashboard. So if you remember that 3-tier hierarchy, customer at the top, organizations in the middle, accounts at the bottom, well, that 3 tiers is right there, right? Nutanix demo in this case is the customer entity, Z is my personal organization, and Z pooled is the name of this account. So every single account in your overall Frame environment will have its own dashboard associated with it. And the most important thing in dashboard is probably Sandbox, right? And again, this is where you would make changes to your gold image, right? As an administrator, this is where you install new application updates, push out OS hotfixes, update your antivirus. You can integrate this with your SCCM, right? So that you can basically put the SCCM agent on your Sandbox and push changes from there. But if you want to make a change, you simply power on your Sandbox, establish a connection to it, make the change, test it, log out, and hit publish. When you hit publish, what Frame will automatically do is a number of things. The first thing it'll do is it'll automatically create a backup of your latest Sandbox image. So if you ever need to revert back to it, if you ever made a, let's say, a mistake, you can simply click on the version of the backup, click here, hit restore, and Frame will automatically restore your image back to that version of the Sandbox, okay? We'll also then automatically start, pushing out the new image to production. So if I take a look at my status page, you'll see that these are all the VMs I have in this particular account, right? For demo purposes, and this could be hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of VMs. And what Frame will automatically do is that when you publish, any VMs that do not have any active sessions, which none of these do, will automatically get the latest image of the sandbox. If Frame detects that there is a user in session, they'll automatically wait for them to log off. As soon as they log off, that VM gets updated with the image as well. So what this means is that you as an admin, you can push out changes to your images during production hours, right, or business hours without having to schedule any kind of change control windows after hours or on weekends because Frame handles it automatically, okay? Other things we can do, what's very unique with Frame that you can't do with other solutions is how you can not only, assign different applications to users, but also what kind of resources to them. So you'll see that this account's in GCP, and this is running from a sandbox perspective, the gold image perspective, on what's called an Air 8, which in this case is a 2 vCPU, 8 gig of RAM machine, which is the M1 standard 2 in GCP, right? With other solutions, whatever your gold image is in terms of CPU, memory, and GPU, right, all of your production VMs would also have that same allocation. With Frame, that's not the case. So if I were to take you to Launchpad, again, Launchpad is where you would assign changes. So for example, if I wanted to, create a new one called, let's say, test, right, I can do so. And here I can then specify specific applications for these users. Let's say I want to give them Adobe Reader, and let's say I want to give them, Windows Explorer, Chrome, Teams, Outlook, PowerPoint, and Slack, and, let's say Word, right? I can do that. I can hit save. That's the first thing I can do. And now I can assign this to a specific Active Directory security group, Okta group, whatever you want to use to assign them to their resources. But I can also then choose what kind of VM type these users then log in from. So these are mostly, back office, task worker applications. So you know what? A 2 vCPU, 4 gig of RAM machine would be sufficient. I can go ahead and uncheck the other VMs. And what we support here really depends on the public cloud provider. If you're deploying this on-prem, you can create whatever instance types you want. So you can create one called light user, medium user, power user, right? And they can have different CPU, memory, and GPU allocations. But for now, I'll choose an Air 4, which is 2x4, hit save. And when I go to this new Launchpad, right, called test, only these applications are available. In the bottom right, you'll see that only the Air 4 is available to deploy to. But let's say I wanted to create another, application Launchpad. Let's say this is for my IT team. I can create that. And for these users, maybe they get access to all my applications on my gold image, right? And for these users, because they're power users, I'm going to basically allow them to choose between, let's say, a 2x8, right, for more back office stuff, and maybe a Pro 16, which has a GPU on it, if they're going to do any kind of, high graphics type of, resources, and hit save. And now when I go to this new Launchpad called IT, these users will see all these applications. In the bottom right, they can actually choose between either launching it from Air 8 or Pro 16. Okay. So I'll pause there. I know that was a lot to take in, but I do want to save some time for questions, for both Nick and myself. So if you have any questions on anything, that I showed you from a demo perspective, please chime in. And if you want to put it in the chat window, you can do that as well. So make sure you're off mute if you're wanting to speak. Okay, no questions. So with that, then I will go ahead and show you some more stuff then with, we have 5 minutes left. So I'll show you how easy it is to deploy a new account, right? So if I am a org admin or higher, you'll see that I have another button here called Go to Admin. And this is kind of the beauty of Frame that Nick mentioned, right? Is that we have the ability to have a single pane of glass for administration perspective. So you'll see that I'm an org admin of these organizations. I'm not a full customer admin. If I were, I see another tab here called Customer. But I am an admin of these organizations, which means I can deploy new accounts to any of these organizations. If I were to go to Accounts and hit Add Account, you'll see I'll choose my personal organization called Z. And let's say this is again for, let's say, let's say this is for Sanity Solutions, right? I can choose my, AHV environment. I have a couple of different AHV clusters I can deploy to, but they're all, out of space. I can also choose Azure. You'll see that I have every single Azure data center around the world available for me to deploy to. Same thing with AWS, every single AWS data center. And the same thing with GCP. All my GCP data centers, all 23 are available here, right? Let's say I want to deploy into Azure, okay? If I want to do a private network, I can do so. If I want to specify a CIDR block, I can do so as well. I'll go ahead and hit Next. Choose my operating system. In Azure, we support these 3. I can choose Windows 10. And let's say I want to choose my initial instance size, I can, okay? But let's say I want to deploy into Azure, I don't know, let's deploy into Azure Japan, okay? I'll hit next. Again, choose Windows 10. Let's say I want to do, let's say leave it at Air 4. I'll leave it at 128 gigs. If I want to change my disk size, I can do so here. If I want to do persistent desktops, I would choose persistent. If not, leave it unchecked. Hit check, confirm, hit next, hit create, okay? And what this is now doing is this is now going out to Azure Japan East. It is using our application registration that we have linked with our internal Nutanix Azure subscription in this case, right? And so using Frame's automation engine to automatically go out to that data center and basically deploy resource groups in terms of networking, in terms of the initial gold image automatically, right? And this takes about anywhere from, depending on the provider, anywhere from about 15 seconds to about a minute to deploy this. And while it's doing that, if I go to my orgs and go into my cloud accounts, this is what makes Frame unique. So if you want to have one takeaway from today's session, is that we are a hybrid and multi-cloud VDI solution, right? Is that we can have providers from AHV, right, on-prem across multiple data centers, wherever you want to deploy to your public cloud environments. How you integrate public cloud, very simple. In AWS is a cloud account ID that you would then create with CloudFormation. With Azure, it's an application registration that I talked about. With GCP, it's a project ID that you would then prepare with GCP Cloud Shell, right? And you would select your data centers. So let me go ahead and go back to accounts. And you'll see that Sanity Solutions is already done, right? If I click on this, this now takes me into this brand new account, a brand new dashboard for the Sanity Solutions, account that belongs to my Z organization, right? And you'll see that's in Azure and it's in Japan East. So this is kind of how fast it is to deploy a new account for new users globally. So, for example, if you have a developer in India or, the Philippines, and they're complaining about latency because, of distance between where they are and where their VM sits, you can very quickly, right, spin up a new account, for that developer, in a public cloud environment that's very close to them, right, for them to have a better user experience. Of course, this is a very basic deployment. You obviously need to install your applications on top of it. You can also deploy, set things like, configure enterprise profiles, join it to a domain, specify a specific CIDR block. These are all the kind of things you can do. But what's great about Frame is it's all done with a single control plane. You're not logging into multiple consoles to manage this environment. So with that, I'll kind of wrap things up. I think the key takeaway for you guys is, look at Frame as another tool in your tool belt, right? So really you want to match the best, solution for the best use case, whether it's a technical use case requirement, whether it's operations, what kind of expertise you have within your organization, right? There's a lot of different VDI solutions out there, from your more robust and more complex ones like a Citrix or like a Horizon, to the other end of the spectrum, which is your pure play desktop as a service, things like Amazon Workspaces and WVD, right? There's pros and cons to each. We, with Frame, what we're trying to do is really be that kind of middle of the road solution, right? Where, you can think of it as like Goldilocks, right? It's just right. We're trying to strike that balance between feature robustness, right? But also not make it so that the solution is overly complex, where it's, so complex that, unless you have a dedicated SME or SMEs on your team to manage, that also, can affect your overall quality of your deployment, right? So it's really striking that right balance between, again, operational complexity, feature availability, as well as not locking you into a specific public cloud provider, and also having the option of deploying into your private data center. So with that, we're at the top of the hour. Any additional questions I can, either myself or Nick can help answer for you guys?
Yangzhi, would you mind throwing up that last slide on the PowerPoint for us?
Yeah, sure. Let me kind of go back into. There you go.
Perfect. Thank you for all of you that hung in there with us. We really appreciate your time today. We do have some gift cards for all of our attendees, so please just shoot an email to marketing@sanitysolutions.com and we'll get those headed your way. Please do include names and whatnot so that we know who you are and can make sure we can get those over to you. That email is also your entry into a drawing we're going to be doing for a soft-sided Yeti cooler. So we'll be getting in touch with those folks probably early next week.
Perfect. Well, I would like to personally thank the Sanity Solutions team for putting this together. I really appreciate the partnership here. And for all the folks on the phone, thank you so much for your time and participation. If you have any questions around Frame or want to do a follow-up, please reach out to your Sanity Solutions rep, and they'll get out to myself or my team, and we'll be able to help you address any of your questions.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Take care, guys. Stay safe.
Thank you.